Her people wanted power, but she wanted the human who showed her love. The unexpected encounter. The crystalline spires of the Nexarian capital stretched toward 3 purple moons, their surfaces alive with swirling patterns of light that responded to Empress Valia Starborn's emotions. Today, those patterns flickered with boredom, endless spirals of muted gold that betrayed her true feelings about the spectacle unfolding in her throne room. Valia sat upon the seat of stars, carved from a single meteorite that had witnessed the birth of galaxies. Her gown seemed woven from starlight itself, shifting between deep violet and silver as she moved. The crown upon her head, a delicate circlet of crystallized time, hummed softly with power that could reshape reality with a thought. She was 26 standard years old and had already conquered 17 star systems, not through violence, but through the sheer gravitational pull of her presence. Beings across the galaxy spoke her name in hushed reverence, and today, as always, they had come to compete for her attention. "Your Imperial Radiance," intoned High Counselor Thane, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Prince Zerion of the Molten Throne presents his offering." The prince stepped forward, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the light as he held aloft a cube containing a miniature sun. "Empress Valia, I offer you the heart of my home star, forged into eternal flame by my love for you." Valia nodded politely, her expression unchanged. The gift was magnificent, impractical, and utterly predictable. She had received dozens like it: compressed nebulae, crystallized supernovas, the tears of dying gods. Each suitor believed that grander gestures would win her heart, never understanding that her boredom grew with each cosmic offering. "Lord Vastok of the Iron Moons," Thane continued, "presents his tribute." A towering figure in mechanized armor approached, his steps creating small tremors in the polished floor. "Empress, I bring you the blade of absolute victory, forged in the core of a black hole and tempered with the screams of my conquered enemies." "How thoughtful," Valia murmured, though her tone suggested otherwise. The weapon was certainly impressive, but violence had never been her preferred language. She commanded through inspiration, not intimidation. The presentations continued for another hour. Admiral Zoreth offered her a fleet of ships that could traverse dimensions. Philosopher King Mendax presented a theorem that could unravel the mysteries of existence itself. Each gift was more elaborate than the last, each suitor more desperate to prove their worth. Valia's attention drifted to the great windows that lined the eastern wall, where she could see the orbital docks of her capital world. Somewhere among those gleaming platforms, ordinary people lived ordinary lives, free from the suffocating weight of absolute reverence. She envied them. "Your radiance," Thane whispered, leaning close to her throne. "Ambassador Cross and her escort have arrived for the trade negotiations." Valia straightened slightly. The humans were an interesting species, young, chaotic, and refreshingly unpredictable. Their ambassador, Lydia Cross, was sharp-witted and treated interstellar politics like an elaborate game of chess. It would be pleasant to speak with someone who didn't prostrate themselves every few sentences. As if summoned by her thoughts, the great doors of the throne room burst open with a resonant clang. But instead of the carefully choreographed entrance she expected, a single figure stumbled through, looking harassed and slightly lost. Captain Dante Rivers of the Terran merchant vessel Wanderer stood in the doorway, his dark hair disheveled, and his standard-issue jumpsuit bearing the wrinkles of hasty travel. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of years spent working on starship engines. His brown eyes swept the throne room, taking in the assembled dignitaries, the cosmic gifts, and the generally overwhelming grandeur with an expression of mild exasperation. "Sorry," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I'm looking for Conference Room 7. Your palace is extensive." A shocked gasp rippled through the court. Several alien dignitaries recoiled as if physically struck. Lord Vostok's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. High Counselor Thane's face flushed a deep shade of purple that Velia had never seen before. "You dare!" Thane began, rising from his position beside the throne. "Actually," Dante continued, apparently oblivious to the murderous atmosphere, "I've been wandering around for 20 minutes trying to find Ambassador Cross. Your staff directions were creative. Follow the singing crystals past the waterfall of light until you reach the garden where time flows backward. I mean, points for poetry, but not so much for practical navigation." Velia found herself leaning forward, studying this unexpected visitor with genuine curiosity. In all her years of receiving supplicants, not one had ever entered her throne room and immediately started complaining about the architecture. "Human," Thane snarled, "you stand before Empress Velia Starborn, sovereign of the Nexarian Empire, she who commands the very stars. You will show proper respect or—" "Thane," Velia interrupted, her voice soft but carrying absolute authority. "Be silent." The counselor's mouth snapped shut, though his eyes continued to burn with indignation. Velia rose from her throne, the movement causing ripples of light to cascade down her gown. The assembled court watched in fascination as she descended the crystal steps, each footfall creating harmonic chimes that resonated through the chamber. "Captain Rivers," she said, having read his name from the subtle psychic impressions that surrounded all living beings, "you seem to be lost." Dante blinked, clearly surprised that she knew his name. "Yeah, that's about the size of it. Though I have to say, this is probably the most impressive wrong turn I've ever made." He gestured at the vaulted ceiling, where holographic constellations slowly wheeled in their eternal dance. "Do you redecorate often, or is this the permanent setup?" A strangled noise emerged from somewhere in the crowd of suitors. Velia felt the corners of her mouth twitch upward, an expression she hadn't worn in months. "This is the celestial throne room," she explained, finding herself oddly delighted by his casual tone. "It serves as the center of imperial power for 300 worlds." "Impressive," Dante nodded, genuinely appreciative. "Must be a pain to heat in winter." The comment was so absurdly practical that Velia actually laughed, a sound that had not echoed in these halls for over a year. The crystalline walls responded to her amusement, flooding the chamber with warm amber light that made everyone present look suddenly more alive. "You are not what I expected from a human escort," she admitted. "I'm not really an escort," Dante replied with a shrug. "I'm a cargo hauler who got volunteered for diplomatic duty because my ship was the only one in the sector with a working diplomatic suite. Ambassador Cross needed transport, and apparently my reputation for not getting people killed was enough qualification." "And what do you think of our empire, Captain Rivers?" Dante considered the question seriously, his gaze sweeping the throne room once more. "Honestly, it's beautiful, but it feels a bit lonely. All this grandeur, all these people trying to impress. He looked directly at her, and Velia was startled to realize that his expression held no trace of the reverence or desire she had grown accustomed to. Instead, she saw something she hadn't encountered in years: genuine sympathy. "When's the last time someone just asked how your day was going?" The question hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time? She couldn't remember. Every conversation was either formal state business or elaborate courtship ritual. No one had asked about her well-being in so long that she had almost forgotten. "People could, she began, then stopped, unsure how to respond. "Right," Dante said gently, interpreting her silence correctly. "That's what I thought." He glanced around at the watching crowd, noting their barely contained hostility. "Look, I should probably find Ambassador Cross before your people decide to have me executed for insufficient groveling. But for what it's worth, Your Majesty, you seem like you could use a friend more than another admirer." He started to turn away, but Velia's voice stopped him. "Captain Rivers." "Yes?" "Conference Room 7 is on the administrative level, third corridor past the Hall of Whispered Secrets. Tell the guide crystals that the Empress sent you directly. Dante." smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had seen directed at her in months. "Thank you. And hey, if you ever want to grab coffee somewhere less cosmic, let me know. I make a decent cup, and I promise not to offer you any conquered star systems." With that, he walked out, leaving behind a throne room full of speechless dignitaries and one empress who, for the first time in her reign, found herself wondering what it would be like to be seen not as a prize to be won, but as a person to be known. High Counselor Thane materialized beside her throne like a storm cloud given form. "Empress, this incident cannot dismiss the court," Velia said quietly, her eyes still fixed on the doorway where Dante had disappeared. "But the presentations are not yet complete." "Dismiss them, Thane. All of them." As the confused and disappointed suitors filed out, muttering among themselves about the unprecedented breach of protocol, Velia remained standing before her empty throne, touched by starlight and, for the first time in years, genuinely intrigued by another being. Somewhere in the administrative levels of her palace, a human cargo captain was drinking coffee with a diplomat, completely unaware that he had just accomplished what conquerors and kings had failed to do for decades. He had made the Empress of Stars feel human. The choice between duty and heart. The emergency council meeting had been called at dawn, though on a world with 3 suns, dawn was more of a philosophical concept than a practical one. Velia sat at the head of the obsidian conference table, her usual composure masking the turmoil that had kept her awake through the night cycle. Around her, the most powerful beings in her empire argued with barely contained fury. "This human has made fools of us all," snarled General Crix Vorthak, his forearms gesticulating wildly as bioluminescent war paint pulsed across his scaled hide. "The entire galaxy will hear of how a mere cargo hauler walked into the sacred throne room and insulted our traditions." "He didn't insult anything," Velia said quietly, but her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "He was lost. Lost." High Counselor Thane's skeletal fingers drummed against the table's surface. "Your radiance, with respect." His casual demeanor was a calculated slight. "Humans are more cunning than they appear." Velia thought of Dante's genuine surprise at finding himself in the throne room, his obvious concern for her well-being, and nearly smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Cunning was hardly the word she would use to describe him. "The damage to imperial prestige is considerable," continued Chancellor Vex of the Trade Consortium, her multiple eyes blinking in sequence. 3 minor systems have already sent inquiries about whether the Empire's standards for diplomatic protocol have relaxed. And Lord Vastok has formally withdrawn his marriage proposal, added Minister Quinn, his crystalline form chiming softly with agitation. "He claims he cannot compete with someone who shows such brazen disregard for proper ceremony." "Perhaps that says more about Lord Vastok than about Captain Rivers," Velia observed. The comment drew sharp looks from around the table. General Vorthak leaned forward, his predator's instincts clearly engaged. "Your Radiance, surely you cannot be considering this human as a serious prospect. He possesses no territory, no army, no genetic enhancements. What could he possibly offer the Empire?" Before Velia could respond, the conference room's crystalline doors chimed softly. Princess Nara Starborn entered with the fluid grace that ran in their bloodline, her younger features bright with barely contained excitement. At 19, Nara possessed all of Velia's power, but none of the weariness that came with ruling. "Sister," Nara said, bowing formally before taking her seat, "I apologize for my tardiness. I was in the archives researching human customs." Thane's expression soured further. "Princess, this is hardly the time for anthropological curiosity." "On the contrary," Nara replied smoothly, "I think it's exactly the time. Did you know that humans have a concept called love at first sight? It's considered one of their most romantic ideals, the idea that 2 souls can recognize each other instantly, regardless of social station or political advantage." The silence that followed was thunderous. Velia felt heat rise in her cheeks, betraying emotions she had tried to keep carefully buried. "Princess," General Vorthak said dangerously, "are you suggesting that the Empress has fallen victim to some primitive human delusion?" "I'm suggesting," Nara said with the fearlessness of youth, "that perhaps we should consider why a woman who has rejected the courtship of galactic conquerors and philosopher kings found herself intrigued by a lost cargo." "Captain." "Because he showed her no reverence," Thane spat. "Novelty is not the same as genuine affection." "No," Valia said quietly, and every head turned toward her. "Because he saw me as a person, not a prize to be won or a symbol to be worshipped." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When was the last time any of you asked how I felt about the constant parade of suitors? When did any of you consider that I might want something more than political advantage from a life partner?" The council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had served her faithfully for years, but always in the context of imperial duty. Personal happiness had never entered their calculations. "Your radiance," Thane said carefully. "Your feelings are important, but you are not merely Velia Starborn. You are the Empress. Your choices affect billions of beings across hundreds of worlds." "I am aware of my responsibilities," Velia replied, steel entering her voice. "But I am also aware that an Empress who sacrifices her own humanity for political expedience may find herself ruling an empire that lacks the very qualities that make life worth living." Before the debate could continue, an urgent chime sounded throughout the palace. The holographic display at the center of the table flickered to life, revealing the concerned face of Captain Lorien of the Palace Guard. "Your Radiance," the captain said, "we have a situation in the diplomatic quarter." The display shifted to show the palace's central courtyard, where a crowd had gathered in a loose circle. At the center, two figures faced each other across 20 feet of polished stone. One was General Vorthak's champion, Brix Vorthak, the general's nephew, and one of the most feared warriors in the known galaxy. The other was Captain Dante Rivers, looking significantly less confident than he had the day before. "By the stars," Velia breathed, rising from her chair. "What is happening?" "Challenge combat, Your Radiance," Captain Lorien reported grimly. The human apparently accepted a formal duel. Velia's blood ran cold. Challenge combat was an ancient tradition, rarely invoked, but absolutely binding when properly declared. The victor gained not only personal honor, but the right to make a formal petition to the throne, including marriage proposals. "He what?" Nara gasped, her face pale. General Vorthak's expression had shifted from anger to smug satisfaction. "It seems your human friend has more courage than sense. Brix issued the challenge last night, citing the insult to imperial dignity. The human accepted within the hour." "He doesn't understand what he's gotten himself into," Velia said, her composure cracking. "Humans don't have enhanced reflexes or armored hide. This isn't a fair fight. It's an execution." "Perhaps," Thane mused, "this will resolve our diplomatic complications rather neatly." The casual dismissal of Dante's life ignited something fierce in Velia's chest. She spun toward her counselor, and for a moment the air around her shimmered with barely contained power. "If you value your position in this government," she said softly, "you will never again speak so callously about the life of someone under imperial protection." Thane stepped back, genuine fear flickering in his ancient eyes. "We need to stop this," Velia continued, already moving toward the door. "Sister," Nara called after her, "challenge combat cannot be interrupted once accepted. Imperial law is absolute. On this point—" Velia paused, her hand on the door controls. "Ancient law versus personal desire. Duty versus the heart. The eternal conflict that had defined her reign. Then we watch," she said finally, "and we pray to whatever gods still listen, that courage can overcome impossible odds." The courtyard was packed when the imperial party arrived. Word of the challenge had spread through the palace like wildfire, drawing curious onlookers from every corner of the complex. Velia took her place on the observation platform, acutely aware of every whispered conversation and speculative glance. In the center of the courtyard, Dante looked remarkably calm for someone about to face certain death. He had abandoned his jumpsuit for simple, dark clothing that allowed for easier movement, though Velia noticed he carried no weapon beyond a standard plasma pistol. His opponent, by contrast, was a walking arsenal. Ceremonial battle armor covered his massive frame, and traditional Vorthak blade whips coiled at his sides like metallic serpents. "This is madness," muttered Ambassador Cross, who had positioned herself near the Imperial platform. "I tried to talk him out of it, but he insisted he couldn't back down without dishonoring the entire human delegation." "He has honor," Velia acknowledged. "Unfortunately, honor may not be enough." The Challenge Master, an ancient Nexarian whose family had overseen formal combat for centuries, stepped forward with ceremonial gravity. "Let it be known," his voice carried clearly across the courtyard, "that this combat is declared under the old laws. Victory to the survivor, honor to the fallen, and binding consequence to the outcome." Brix Vorthak raised his primary weapon, a II blade whip, crackling with energy that could slice through starship hull plating. "For the honor of the Empire and the insult to divine majesty," Dante drew his plasma pistol with practiced ease. "For the right to speak my mind without getting killed for it." The crowd laughed at what they assumed was human naivety. Velia didn't laugh. She had heard the quiet steel in his voice. "Begin," the Challenge Master declared. What followed was unlike any challenge combat in Imperial history. Brix Vorthak was everything his reputation promised: fast, powerful, and utterly ruthless. His blade whips carved through the air with deadly precision, each strike capable of ending the fight instantly. But Dante Rivers had spent 15 years keeping cargo ships running in the most dangerous regions of space. He had learned to think 3 steps ahead of pirates, slavers, and worse. As Brix charged forward with overwhelming force, Dante did something unexpected. He ran, not in retreat, but in a calculated pattern that used the courtyard's architecture to his advantage. Pillars became cover, steps became elevated firing positions, and decorative fountains became obstacles that disrupted Brix's attacks. The crowd's laughter died as they realized they were watching not cowardice, but strategy. Dante's plasma pistol snapped up repeatedly, not aiming for killing shots but targeting Brix's equipment. A blade whip's power coupling, an armor joint servo, the targeting system on his opponent's helmet. Each shot was precise, methodical, and gradually degrading his opponent's advantages. "Impossible!" General Vorthak breathed. "How is he doing this?" "He's fighting smart instead of strong," Nara observed, admiration clear in her voice. Velia found herself leaning forward, her heart racing with each near miss. This wasn't the cosmic-level power she was accustomed to seeing displayed. This was human ingenuity, resourcefulness, and sheer stubborn determination. The turning point came when Brix, frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, overextended himself in a massive overhead strike. Dante sidestepped at the last possible moment, letting momentum carry his opponent past him, then fired a precise shot at the back of Brix's knee joint. The massive warrior went down hard, his damaged armor finally betraying him. Before he could rise, Dante was behind him with the plasma pistol pressed against the base of his skull. "Do you yield?" Dante asked quietly. The courtyard fell silent. Brix Vorthak, champion of his house and terror of 3 sectors, slowly raised, his hands in surrender. "I yield," he said, loud enough for all to hear. The crowd erupted in chaos. Cheers, arguments, and at least one diplomatic incident as representatives tried to process what they had just witnessed. Velia barely heard any of it. Her attention was focused entirely on the human captain who had just accomplished the impossible. Dante holstered his weapon and immediately moved to help his defeated opponent stand. The gesture of respect toward a fallen enemy drew approving murmurs from even the most skeptical observers. "Captain Rivers," the challenge master announced, "by right of victory, you may petition the throne." Dante looked up at the Imperial platform, his eyes meeting Velia's across the distance. The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. "Your Radiance," he called out, "I'd like to request a private audience. I have something to ask you, and I'd prefer not to do it in front of half the known universe." Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm laughter this time, not mocking. Even some of the stuffier dignitaries seemed charmed by his approach. Velia rose from her seat, aware that every word she spoke now would be analyzed and debated across 1,000 worlds. The political implications were staggering. The personal implications were even more so. "Captain Rivers," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "your petition is granted. We will convene in the Garden of Quiet Thoughts in 1 hour." As she turned to leave, she caught Nara's eye. Her sister was grinning with barely contained excitement. "Sister," Nara whispered, "I think you're about to make history." "I think," Velia replied softly, "I'm about to make a choice." An hour later, in a garden where time flowed differently and the flowers sang softly in harmonious chords, Empress Velia Starborn sat on a simple stone bench beside Captain Dante Rivers. They were alone, except for the distant presence of guards, who had been instructed to remain far enough away to allow private conversation. "That was quite a fight," Velia said. Dante rubbed his shoulder ruefully. "I got lucky. If he hadn't gotten overconfident, I'd be decorating the courtyard right about now." "You were magnificent." "I was terrified." He turned to look at her directly. "But I wasn't going to let some oversized lizard kill me for the crime of treating you like a human being." The simple honesty of the statement hit her harder than any formal declaration of love ever could. "Dante," she said carefully, "you know what you're asking, don't you? If we pursue this path, it will complicate everything. The political ramifications alone." "I know," he interrupted gently. "And I know you're the Empress of Stars, and I'm a cargo hauler from nowhere in particular. I know every advisor you have probably thinks I'm either crazy or scheming. But here's the thing, Velia." The use of her name, spoken without title or ceremony, sent a thrill through her that she didn't bother to hide. "I've seen you laugh. I've seen you lonely. I've seen you be human, and that's who I care about. Not the Empress, not the cosmic power, not the political alliance, just you." Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years threatened to fall. "My people need me to be more than human. Your people need you to remember what it means to be human," Dante countered. "An empress who forgets her own heart might protect her empire, but she can't inspire it." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the singing flowers sway in the artificial breeze. Finally, Velia spoke. "There will be challenges. Political opposition. Assassination attempts. Half the galaxy will see our relationship as weakness to be exploited." "And the other half?" "The other half," she said, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise, might see it as proof that even empresses can find love. Dante reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand. "So what do you say, Your Radiance? Want to find out what happens when an empress chooses her heart over her throne?" Velia Starborn, ruler of 300 worlds and commander of cosmic forces, looked into the eyes of a cargo captain from Earth and made the most important decision of her reign. "Yes," she said simply. "Let's find out together." Across the galaxy, historians would mark this moment as the beginning of the Great Change, the era when the Nexarian Empire transformed from a cold, efficient machine of conquest into something warmer, more human, more alive. They would debate the political ramifications, analyze the diplomatic consequences, and write dissertations on the cultural implications. But in a quiet garden where flowers sang love songs and time moved like Honey, none of that mattered. What mattered was a woman who had found someone willing to see past her crown, and a man who had discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand gestures, but with simple, honest words. How was your day? The Empire would endure. Love, as it turned out, was the strongest foundation of all.